Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us here in the Bruno Kreisky Forum for International Dialogue. Thank you for your interest in this highly important and challenging topic. Are we ready for the new nuclear age? I think among all these talks about peace deals and peace boards, we tend to get distracted most probably from the very important aspect of agreements, of the rule of law, of a long tradition of non-proliferation, on which we have really very important and active experts here. Experts that have a lot to talk, and Solmaz Horsan, thank you very much for being our curator and moderator this evening. Solmaz Horsan is going to introduce each of them in greater detail. I leave it with this, although I think we understand that since a couple of months and years, we understand that this balance of terror and fear, as it is called, this policy of deterrence also has come to an end, and we see in an age of increasing violence, increasing number of violent conflicts, also the readiness to threaten with nuclear armament. So again, it is indeed important, and maybe this is also reflected in what we see here in interests in the conflicts we usually deal with. So when it's about Ukraine and Russia and other conflicts, a lot of people have the hunger and the interest of how do we solve it, and in the context of the nuclear power game, so to speak, and the challenges we face, be it Iran, be it Israel, be it Pakistan, we understand that this is on top a very probably frightening issue. So thank you very much for joining us, nevertheless, to come here and to hear and listen to our experts and the discussion on how to actually deal with this.
Good evening. I'm very happy to moderate today's panel with these distinguished guests, and I'm very sorry that I have attacked them before we start. I myself, I'm not an expert on nuclear proliferation and arms control, but as a citizen of the world, I'm always worried about war, and in particular about nuclear war. And that's why I suggested Sabine Kreuzenbrunner to make a talk about this issue, so also an audience that is not so professional in this field will learn a little bit more about the so-called third nuclear age, as it is discussed in many nuclear policy communities. So I was curious, what is at stake, what is necessary to get a long-term consensus about the future of nuclear weapons, and are the systems of controls that are in place for so many years, are they fit, or were they ever fit to prevent a nuclear war, or were we just really, really lucky that nothing has happened so far? So I think there is a necessity of a broad public discussion, also in terms of awareness for the issue. But before we start, I will introduce our panel. I will start with Nikolai Sokov. I'm so sorry. He's a senior fellow at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. He previously worked at the Soviet and Russian Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and he participated in the START I and START II negotiations and other arms control negotiations, as well as numerous summits and ministerial meetings. He published over 2,000 books on the matter, and he's a consultant for various agencies and governments, including the Atomic Energy Agency and the US State Department. Next to him is Friederike Vries. She's a senior scientist at the Institute of Safety and Risk Sciences, and she's researching nuclear technology, both in the civil and in the military area. Her research includes also advanced reactor technology, the spread of nuclear energy, and its impact on the non-proliferation regime. It's kind of a tongue twister, the proliferation. It's like really hard to pronounce sometimes, I'm sorry. And she's one of 21 experts that were tasked by the UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres in July 2025 to examine the physical effects and societal consequences of a nuclear war on a local, regional, and planetary scale in the days, weeks, and decades following a nuclear war. And on the very right, my opposite, Ambassador Alexander Kment. He's currently permanent representative of Austria to the United Nations office in Geneva. Before that, he was the director of the Disarmament, Arms Control, and Non-Proliferation Department of the Austrian Foreign Ministry, and is one of the architects of the initiative on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, that entered into force in 2021. And he wrote a book about it, about the treaty, how it was achieved, and why it matters. And he was also elected Arms Control Person of the Year 2014. That sounds like you should come with your medal. Okay, thank you all for being here. I'm very, very happy to have this talk today. I would like to start with Friederike Fries, because when we talk about a potential nuclear attack, I think it's crucial to know what are the consequences for humankind and what is so special about a nuclear attack, also in compared to normal bombs. I think it's very, for many people, it's very abstract, but I would like to break it down to a more understandable level.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you first also to the forum for having us here and talking about this issue. And yeah, I will start with the very basics on that. So what is an explosion? An explosion is a reaction where we release a huge amount of energy. So we have like high temperature, we have high pressure, we have an expansion, then we will have a pressure wave. So this is all the same for conventional and nuclear. But what does the nuclear explosion make special? And this is actually the order of magnitude in which energy is released. Like in the conventional explosive, we have like reaction on a molecular level, and in a nuclear reaction, we have the reaction on a nuclear level. So we have much more energy which is released in a very, very short time, and we have the additional effect of ionizing radiation, of radiological effects. So what is happening? In this very first moment, and with very first moment, I mean something like 10 to the minus 8 seconds, so 0.00001 second, lots of energy are released. So much energy that we actually calculate the amount in tons of conventional explosive, in kilotons of conventional explosive, sometimes even in megatons of conventional explosive. Just from a very small nuclear weapon. What does small mean in this context? The fissile material, which is supposed to be fissioned, is maybe like 4 kilogram, 5 kilogram, 8 kilogram, depending on the weapon design. You can hold it in your hands. This is the size of the actual fissile material. This can be the equivalent of tons and kilotons of conventional explosive. So we do have very, very high temperature. What does very, very high temperature mean? Like the inner sun. We have plasma, so we have the matter expanding really, really fast. So we have the thermal radiation, we have that might ignite fires, we have a pressure wave, which has also significant impact. And then we have the ionizing radiation, we have the residual radiation, and then we will have, initial radiation, and then we will have residual radiation. This is the radiation that kind of stays. But the radiation is actually not the main important thing in the beginning, because even with like the low-yield weapons, you will have the death zone, the area of immediate destruction, where no one will survive, like easy kilometers of diameter, so inner city centers. And there, you don't have to bother about radiological consequences because you're already dead and everything is destroyed.
Can you just explain the area of destruction? Like, because like there are so many different forms of nuclear weapons, and like when we say like the size of Vienna, like if you wanna destroy the size of Vienna within some seconds, like how would you do that?
How? I would use the appropriate weapon, of course. So there are nuclear weapons the size that could easily destroy Vienna. So this is what you need to know. We will talk about that later. Probably you will talk about that later, that actually the people argue that those are weapons that are not to be used, but to deter other people from using them. So I will not go into that into more. But I also want to say that we have also long-range consequences. And those long-range consequences, they were not known in the beginning. So in the beginning, there were like the military, they were measuring the effects like in 200 miles distance, but then they realized it goes farther and farther because the radioactive particle that are lifted up into the air and they are transported, and they can be transported on a very, very long range, especially if you have like high altitude tests, then the particles they can go very high up into the atmosphere, and then they can be transported globally. And we still see that. So for example, if you're looking at wild boars in the mid-European forests, then they do have like a contamination of certain radioactive isotopes. And of course, our first guess is always it's coming from the Chernobyl accident, but actually it's not. The bigger part of this contamination is actually coming from the atmospheric nuclear weapon testing in the 50s and 60s. And this global consequences, they are also one reason why the Limited Test Ban Treaty came into force in the 1961, I guess, because the people realized that this really does have long-ranging and long-lasting consequences. So what's also connected to that is if you have many particles that are actually lifted into the atmosphere, if there are fires which are caused by thermal radiation, then we have those particles that might be also transported globally, and those particles, they do block sunlight. So this is what, if there are enough particles, is then dubbed nuclear winter. If we have a change in air surface temperature, and if we have really large amounts of this kind of soot injection, like large-scale nuclear war, then we can have average drop in surface temperature with like 8 degrees, 6 degrees, 7 degrees, depending on what. And to keep in mind, you should compare that. We are now fighting climate change. We are hoping that we might stay below 2 degrees. If you're going for nuclear winter, it's like 3 or 4 times this amount in change.
Which would mean immediately like food security would be collapsing. Yes.
Maybe what we can learn from that, if we're going into nuclear war, I would not argue that humanity would not survive, but most of us, and with most, I really mean most of us, wouldn't survive.
Mm-hmm. And just one last follow-up question before I come to the two gentlemen. You said in an interview that there was this talk about these small nuclear bombs. Because that sounds for some people really cute and manageable, and like you just like drop a little nuclear bomb somewhere and it won't have this big impact. So can you explain like why that doesn't exist? Like,
so what they usually talk is the difference between low-yield nuclear weapons and high-yield nuclear weapons. So I think I would like to make 2 points here. The first one, there are really many simulations, war games, and so on going on, and basically no simulation stops after one nuclear detonation. It always goes on. And then it doesn't matter so much whether this first one is comparable low yield, middle yield, whatever yield. It's a nuclear explosion. This is the threshold, not the yield of the explosion. And the second one is, like, we know what happened in Hiroshima, we know what happened in Nagasaki, and the bombs that were dropped there, they would be considered low-yield weapons.
Mm-hmm. Nikolai, I would like to, because I've read a very interesting interview with you in the Süddeutsche Zeitung, and you said there we have entered a phase in history that there's many parallels in the beginning of the Cold War. What did you mean by that?
Well, I mean by that during the first half, roughly, of the Cold War in the 50s, in the early 60s, well, arms races were just running free. No regulation, no anything. Yes, countries were simply driven by the worst assumptions. Oh my God, they're gonna attack, yes, and I need more weapons, and so forth. So we are now looking at a similar kind of stage because we've lost all the regulation of nuclear weapons. Well, it wasn't that actually strong and huge. To begin with, it was mostly bilateral only between the United States and Russia, but now we really got none, zero. So the last treaty expired on February 5, so less than 20.
You mean the new strategic arms reduction?
Yes, the new start, yes.
Yeah, the new start.
So that's number one, yes. And number two is, well, nuclear weapons are back into actual politics and deterrence. So nuclear deterrence is back. Yes. So it's very much at the center of relations between states. It's also same as it used to be back in the 50s. To me, it's actually very sad, even like at the personal level.
Because you were involved in so many treaties. And
yes, I did negotiate a number of treaties with informal kind of regimes and so forth. And I was actually very happy about my life. So I had a hand in the agreements that resulted in the dismantlement of about 10,000 probably nuclear weapons, more actually, yes, more. So yes, I thought it was very kind of satisfying. But today I see that everything that I worked on my whole life, well, has now turned to dust. Is nothing that I did, I was so proud of, does not exist anymore. No treaties, even no dialogue. So it's not the first time that we don't have a treaty. But in the past, it was always, okay, we lose a treaty, but we're already negotiating a new one. And soon, yes, it'll continue. Now we don't even have any kind of dialogue, any discussion.
So it's not even back to square one, there is no square.
Yes, there is no square. No, we back to square one, like in the sense, back to the 50s. So we need to start rebuilding things that we did build back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, yeah. That's sad, that's very sad.
In our previous talk you said that the perspective on nuclear war has changed among, and not only nuclear war, also about conflict has changed among world leaders. Like during your time when you were in these negotiation circles, like all the politicians would try to prevent any kind of conflict, or it was like 2 or 3 steps before the conflict would happen, and now they just go straight into the conflict.
Well, that's too kind of back to the 50s. Well, paradoxically, after the end of the Cold War, we rather rapidly actually lost fear of nuclear war. I remember myself back in the 80s, my colleagues in Moscow, my colleagues in Washington, in Europe, yes, and we were all really, really concerned about the risk of nuclear war. We didn't want to see nuclear war. We really feared it. So there was a reason kind of to try, yes, and to get a handle on all that. Now we're not afraid of conflict. Yes, and I don't quite understand, quite honestly, that attitude. Everyone knows that nuclear weapons are around, right? But somehow people think, oh, that's okay, we'll just limit it to conventional, so everything will be fine. So yes, nice, good kind of conventional war. Well, while nuclear weapons are there, you still have very high risk to see their use. Yes, and the most dangerous actually thing is when your adversary has got nuclear weapons, yes, and you lead that adversary to defeat in a conventional conflict, yes, and they say, okay, I'm gonna die, so yes, and let the rest of Europe actually die with me. So we always try to avoid that, even in the worst actually days. Well, the first half of the 80s, yes, I remember actually very, very well. It was extremely tense period. We really kind of thought that we are almost on the verge, right? I would say we still actually try to stay away from direct conflict. It was political, it could be elsewhere in the world, through the proxies, but no direct conflict. Now no one's really afraid of direct conflict.
now I have a side thought, like maybe we are in this kind of religious death cult times, but no, I don't want to go
times.
there.
It's just
I want to go to
being kind of careless, yes, and frankly, losing fear of nuclear weapons, yes, and that's kind of this strange change in the mindset.
Okay, I come to Alexandra. Sabine already mentioned it in her introduction, the question of nuclear deterrence, which means basically as long as we have the weapons, we will be safe. Why is this approach a delusional one? Or is it a delusional one? Maybe it's not.
Thanks a lot. First, I want to thank you for the invitation. The second thing, I have to say that I'm speaking in my personal capacity, so don't hold it against the Austrian Foreign Ministry. And I want to just respond to what Nikolai has said, that we are back to square one in the 1950s. I think we're in a much worse situation, because in the 1950s, essentially, we were dealing with two blocks. We are dealing with a multitude of actors, and we are also in a situation where the technological hurdle to get to nuclear weapons is much lower than it was in the 1950s. So we have a multitude of actors all engaged in nuclear deterrence relationships, of course exponentially increasing the risks of something going wrong. So is nuclear deterrence illusional, dogmatic, death cult, maybe all of the above? But I think the key thing that that I want to say is that we simply don't know if it works. It's of course a fantastic concept. We have these weapons and it guarantees peace. And that's how nuclear deterrence is sold, as a security guarantee. But I think we have to critically scrutinize these assumptions. It is everything but a guarantee. It is in fact a security policy approach that is extremely high risk, and not only for the countries that have these weapons and therefore create these risks, but essentially for the whole planet, for everybody. So I'm always coming to this question, who's got agency on this issue? Is it just the countries that have these weapons, or the leaders in those countries that have these weapons? Or is this really an issue that should be addressed from a planetary, global, common security perspective? And if you do that, then the conversation about nuclear weapons changes. So the problem with nuclear deterrence, I think it is presented as a guarantee, but it is highly speculative. It is based on assumptions around stability, predictability, and rationality. But we know about accidents in the past. We know about miscalculations. We know about the fragility of our leaders. And I mean, just picture the leaders of the countries that have nuclear weapons. Is it really meaningful to put the trust of the survival of this planet into the hands of those people? I would say absolutely unacceptable. And even the distinction between autocracies and democracies doesn't work. So it is a speculative concept that creates unacceptably high risks. It's one of the existential risks for the survival of this planet, therefore, to present it as a security guarantee, I think is at least should be subject to much more critical public debate, global public debate. I would argue that we in reality know much more about what happens if something goes wrong and about the risks of something going wrong than we know about nuclear deterrence working and how it works. And even if we can say we have here a picture-perfect case, nuclear deterrence has worked and it has prevented escalation in the conflict, I would say yes, that's wonderful, but we still then don't know if it will work tomorrow, in the next scenario, slightly different actors and so on. So it is a security policy where nothing ever can go wrong, because if it goes wrong, the risk of escalation, the risk of it going to full-scale nuclear war with the global consequences that we talked about. And the scientific evidence on these global consequences, that's actually what we have much more than we used to have. Mm-hmm. So the point that I would make is we need to have a much, much more transparent societal discourse about these weapons from all the angles, not simply the security policy theoretical side, but also other stakeholders, society really, in all its aspect, whether it is a responsible approach to put the security and the survival of all on a concept that is so riddled with question marks, assumptions, and uncertainties. So I think I would say I cannot disprove that nuclear deterrence works, of course not, and you can say it may work most likely in most cases, but is that sufficient? And I would say, well, let's at least have a discussion and get beyond these slogans about security, the ultimate insurance policy, security guarantee, the umbrella that keeps us safe. I think all these things should be really scrutinized much, much more harshly and critically.
But do you, okay, no. You wanted to, Nikolai wanted to add something and then
yes,
you
actually, yes, I think I will somewhat disagree, Alexander. Basically, we need kind of to understand that nuclear weapons do not create conflict. Well, and it's exactly because nuclear weapons are so terrible and the consequences of their use is so horrible. We kind of think that that nuclear deterrence works. I'm not really talking about strategy, right? Actually, nuclear strategy is made behind the looking glass. It completely defines normal kind of human, like everyday logic. Yes, you got to go behind the behind the looking glass to understand it. But well, just the fear of nuclear weapons, of nuclear use, is really what kind of helps to keep conflict somewhat in check. The problem, what? Sorry about that.
No, he wanted to add to, continue.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yes. Well, basically, yes, let me be somewhat provocative, actually. Yes, if we'll eliminate nuclear weapons tomorrow, does it actually mean that there'll be no war? Oh, yes, there will be war. It'll be conventional war with highly efficient weapons.
But it will be a collapse of civilization.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
sure. Well, so I already I'll give you that example. Yes, and I'll repeat it. So World War II was waged with just conventional weapons, actually very primitive by today's standards. It costs only 50 million lives. So the war, yes, only. So yes, with a conventional actually war in Europe would probably now be, well, about 200 million, something like that. So I'm not saying that nuclear deterrence actually works, but what works, we don't know what will actually work, right? But it's the problem of the international system that we live in. It's not the problem of nuclear weapons. So yes, that's kind of the main point. Yes, I would like to have here, and yes, I just don't agree that that the problem is of humankind's survival is so so tightly linked to the existence of nuclear weapons. We can actually destroy civilization.
in various ways.
Yes, in many ways.
Okay, Friederike?
Yeah, I have 2 points here. The first one is I think we should talk about the time scale in which destruction is possible. So World War II took several years, and we do not want to go back there. But with nuclear weapons, we can destroy the planet as it is, within, I don't know, days, whatever. And the second one, I really did like when you, Alexandra, said that you cannot disprove the effects of deterrence, but like in other realms of our life and science, we actually use the precautionary principle. This is EU law. And then we say, if we do not know what kind of harm this whatever can do, maybe we should not use it. And here we know this thing can do immense harm, and we do not know what good it can do. So maybe we shouldn't use it either. My point.
We don't know if nuclear deterrence works, but we know for sure that it can fail. And we have seen, and we have the evidence about past near misses, where we were simply lucky. So a security policy that creates potentially existential risks to the survival of everybody, and we have the evidence that the assumption that it will always work simply isn't true because we have been lucky in the past. I think that begs the question about responsibility. And then coming back to the point I said before, I understand even that in the bilateral relations, the deterrence relationships between superpowers, that you can come up with this logic and it's impossible to get out of it. But what about the rest of the world? I mean, that I think there is such a huge legitimacy issue. So we know now really that essentially all global issues can only be solved through global cooperation, even if some of the leaders that we currently see don't seem to think that. But at the end of the day, we know we are one planet. So why would we look at nuclear weapons exclusively from the narrow national security perspective when in reality it is a much, much bigger issue? So that's the one thing. No, okay, sorry.
No, I was just, because I wanted to ask you, like, because I assume that all three of you are very much in this international circle, talk with politicians, talk with diplomats, talk with experts and academics. How much is there an atmosphere of urgency in these circles, or are people rather laid back and say, well, nothing will happen and we're good? Like, because like you, all of you are like very, very, very alert about this issue.
Yeah, I mean, there are essentially, if I can answer, at least from my perspective, because I'm of course much involved in these diplomatic processes, there is of course a deep split in the international community on this issue. There are about, there are 9 countries that have these weapons and about 3 dozens that are under nuclear umbrella security guarantees, and the discourse on those countries is, it's a shame, but that's how it is, we can't get out of it, you always point the finger at someone else, you have to move first. Essentially, the security argument of nuclear weapons is very, very strong. But then there are also 150 other countries who do not have these weapons, who have signed all sorts of international legal instruments forswearing these weapons for themselves, subjecting themselves to very stringent controls, for example, through the International Atomic Energy here in Vienna. And for them, the sense of urgency about the direction of travel that we're seeing, that the multilateral regime is falling apart, that there is this re-emphasis on nuclear weapons. So how are we supposed to keep the lid on it when there is such an emphasis and when the argument that nuclear weapons are essential for security is made so strongly as it is now because of the worsening geopolitical development. So if you think that through, for example, the nuclear weapons debate in Europe or in Asia or in the Middle East, if you think that through, if you make the argument nuclear weapons are essential for security, that applies for everybody. Exactly. So, and if you think that through, we live in a world with many dozens countries that will develop these weapons over time, all in mutually assured destruction deterrence relationships with the risks that come with that. That is simply not a good future. So we have to find a way out of it, and I think that's the direction the 150 countries that do not have these weapons want to push. It's very difficult at the moment because the trend in those 9 countries and in the 36 other countries goes in a different direction. But if we do not solve that, down the line, I think we will be in a much worse situation with extremely high risks. I mean, the doomsday clock was only set for 2026 a couple of weeks ago, is now at the closest it has ever been since 1947. Okay. So we should listen to the scientists.
We need to explain the doomsday clock. I mean, unless everyone knows what the doomsday clock is, everyone knows what the doomsday clock is. Okay, good. Okay, it's 85 seconds. Before we address the issue of the double standards in also concerning nuclear energy, I would like to ask Friederike about the nexus between the civil use of nuclear energy and the military use, and why it facilitates or makes it more attractive for countries that have already the civil use of nuclear energy to have one day nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the interesting point is, like, as you said, we have 9 nuclear weapon states, and then we have like 30-ish states under nuclear umbrella. And then we have a couple of states that actually do not own nuclear weapons, but they are so advanced in their civil use of nuclear technology that they are basically latent nuclear weapon states. So for them to go from like not being a nuclear weapon state to becoming a nuclear weapon state, this would be a really, really quick step. And what's the reason of that? Because basically, like, all the technologies that we are currently using in the civil nuclear fuel cycle, they were developed during the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was the military project to develop nuclear weapons. And after the World War II, you had all this technology, and then you could use it. And it's still the same. So if you're using nuclear power plants, they were originally developed to produce plutonium. You use uranium enrichment to produce your fuel. This was developed to produce highly enriched uranium for nuclear weapons. And this goes on for several of these technologies. So whenever you consider a state becoming like a nuclear state having nuclear power plants, then this inevitably lowers the threshold for this state to get also a nuclear weapon. And we do have international treaties on that. The most famous one is the treaty on the non-proliferation treaty. Yeah. And this basically sets that we have different kind of states globally. So we have states that own nuclear weapons, and those are kind of supposed to negotiate in good faith. And then we have states that are not allowed to have nuclear weapons, but those they are allowed to have civil nuclear power plants. And this is another reason why we have like several discussions on what are states actually allowed to do or not allowed to do. And some states that have nuclear weapons, like the P5, those are the states that are allowed to have nuclear weapons according to the treaty. And then there are other states, they are not part of the treaty. And then there are the other states that are actually part of the treaty, and they claim their right to use nuclear technology in a civil way.
Because I think in this context we can also, I mean, I didn't want to make this discussion about Iran, but I feel like it's a little bit the elephant in the room, and there are certain there are now again negotiations between the US and Iran, and because Iran always says, okay, we're just using nuclear energy for civil use, not for military use, but everyone else. Why would you need uranium enriched for 60% if you only use it civilly? I would like to ask all three of you, like, how do you see the international community has dealt with this issue with Iran within the treaties, and also like with this question of like who has the right to have nuclear energy for civil or for military use?
So maybe I will start here again with some of the basic understanding. In general, for nuclear weapons, you want uranium, which has 90% of the uranium isotope 235. So this is also can be used really nicely for civil nuclear power plants. However, because it's also very good as a fissile material for nuclear weapons, there's like a general agreement that we're not enriching to that level for nuclear power plants. So the current light water reactor fleet, it uses like 3 to 5% enriched uranium. There are still reactors running, e.g. in Germany, research reactors on 90% enriched uranium, but okay. So the point is, this is not like a linear thing. you are not using the same amount of separative work if you want to go from 3% to 20% enrichment, or from, if you're 60% enrichment, it's basically all the work is almost done to get to 90% enrichment, and it's all in the same facilities. So on the one side, you can really rightly claim that you're doing this for your civil purposes. On the other side, you're really, really getting close to the range where it's purely military, and it's really hard to detect the difference. And in my opinion, I think it's really an issue that we had like the one country, the Iran, which is actually a member of international treaties on that matter, and which followed those limitations and which had inspection, and there is like a big discussion. And on the other side, we have countries that are not members of the treaty anymore and they own nuclear weapons. And then we have countries that own nuclear weapons and they are not part of the treaties, and they're like kind of special treaties now to enable things that would be actually forbidden. So it's maybe not only a double standard, it's like a threefold or fourfold standard here, depending on your international relations. And this also comes kind of with like the misuse. So what is mis, and who decides who is allowed to use something and not, and what is actually the correct way to use something or not? What is the acceptable way to use something, which is like the fissile material, the technology or not? And I think we are kind of in deep trouble here if we're starting to have, or like we're having treaties that really make difference between different parties to the treaties, like on kind of arbitrary rules, and in this case on the rule who actually already managed something to a certain date and who didn't.
I think, Nicola, you compared the good ones and the bad ones with the Lord of the Rings, the elves and the ogres.
Well, yeah.
Orcars.
Yes.
I'm not an elf.
Well, don't even
I don't
get me
start.
started. Yeah, on that. But really, yeah, we kind of in the Lord of the Rings mentality now. Yes, in the Lord of the Rings world. We're elves, so we're good, yes, and we kind of pass the final judgment, yes, and these guys are orcs, yes, and they're, by definition, they're bad. So yes, and that mentality is probably one of the most actually dangerous things, because we just don't even talk to each other. Yes, we know that we're good, yes, and we know that they're bad, and they know that they're bad.
Were they that bad, like in the case of Iran, were they? Because...
Well, yeah, they're bad, period.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, a bad regime, yeah. Yes, actually back to the security kind of problem. Well, just go back to 2003. So the second war in the Gulf, the United States invaded Iraq, by the way, in violation of international law, but they invaded a bad country, so it's okay. So two countries during that time had small, actually nuclear weapons kind of program, more like, well, they didn't have materials, they just were doing some kind of research. Yes, Iranians did some research into how you create a nuclear weapon, yes, and North Koreans did some research into how you create nuclear weapons. So after the second war in the Gulf in 2003, the Iranians decided to close everything. So they eliminated whatever small kind of nuclear weapons program they had. Yes, North Koreans did exactly the opposite. They accelerated the program, yes, and a few years later, they acquired the nuclear weapons. So who got actually bombed last year?
And is the world now safer? But
so yeah, that's kind of the challenge. That's the problem. Yes, and that's the world that we live in. Yes, and I'm really kind of concerned that once again, we had Iraq 2003, we had Libya 2011, right? And we do suddenly show plenty of countries that to stay safe you need to have nuclear weapons. And that's really, really actually terrible. So that's one point. The second point, yeah, we talk about Iran. Yes, bad guys might actually be doing nuclear weapons. We don't, by the way, have evidence out there. But, well, they're bad, so they must be making nuclear weapons. But there are also actually some good guys. Say South Korea, for example, is now debating the acquisition of nuclear weapons. South Korea can actually produce plutonium, yes, and they did actually some production of plutonium actually that can be used for nuclear weapons. They just only need to scale it, but that's okay, right? But we don't really talk about South Korea because they're good guys. Always on the side of the elves.
Okay, the South Korean elves. Alexander, you wanted to mention
on
something?
Iran, I think it shows the sort of the limit or the weakness of the non-proliferation treaty. Iran is a country that has signed up to the treaty, so it is allowed to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, and it is not allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. But there is, of course, a huge gray zone. So what Iran has been found out in 2003, that they were doing things that very clearly pointed into the direction that they wanted to develop nuclear weapons. It was never actually entirely proven. But since then, they've been subjected to the most stringent controls under the IAEA, and in 2015, there was the famous JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Program of Action, the Iran deal, which actually worked. So what Iran had done, it's developing the technology, saying we're doing this only in exercising our right for peaceful uses of nuclear energy, while of course much of what they were doing was seen by the rest of the world under the suspicion that they actually wanted to cross the line. But until you've developed a nuclear weapon and you test a nuclear weapon, you have not broken the non-proliferation treaty. So you have done things which point in the direction that that's what you want to go to, but until you actually do it, you can still maintain, I'm just doing this to exercise my right. And I think that's part of the weakness. The problem, as far as I'm concerned, is that this JCPOA was really working. It was a rare diplomatic, multilateral success story that set out to do something, and I think it fulfilled it. And unfortunately, the US left under the first Trump administration, and what Iran has been doing then in response to that was, of course, really, really bad. And doing even more things pointing into the direction that they want to cross the threshold. But we should not forget the fact that we had an agreement which was working, and whether or not we are today in a better situation than we were in 2018, I think it was, when the US left the treaty, I think that's very much up to debate. So I think it's tragic that we are in a situation with Iran where we are today, and of course the example that is being set is a very, very bad one.
Before I open the floor to the audience, I have just two more questions. One is, again, addressed to you, Alexander, because I wanted to talk about the TPNW, why it matters, and especially also for like small countries like Austria, like what kind of meaningful role can they have in treaties, while Austria doesn't have nuclear energy, doesn't have nuclear weapons. And yeah, and why was this treaty so important that many, I'm not sure how many have heard of it, but outside of the community?
A couple of points. First of all, the point I made before is who has agency on the issue. I think it is important. This is a treaty that represents the view of the vast majority of countries that have security concerns about these weapons and want to see them dealt with in the way of moving away from nuclear weapons. And of course, in the treaties that pre-existed the TPNW, it wasn't really possible to do this in a very credible way. Unfortunately, the non-proliferation treaty has not delivered on the nuclear disarmament obligation. So there is actually an obligation on the nuclear weapon states to make progress there, but we haven't made progress there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the increasing scientific work and evidence on the humanitarian consequences and risks of things going wrong and what happens if they go wrong, which of course reinforces the urgency of trying to make progress. So, and what is the agency that the 150 states have? We cannot coerce, we cannot wish these weapons away, we cannot force the countries that have these weapons to give them up, but we have legal agency. We have agency of public opinion, we have agency of influencing the discourse about nuclear weapons. And I think we have had very significant developments there. We haven't changed the discourse in the countries that have these weapons yet, but it's getting much more urgent. We have had huge impact in the 150 plus countries who really understand this science and the humanitarian impact of these weapons and the risks of these weapons much, much better. The fact that there is now this scientific panel is a direct result of the work that we have done. And then from a legal point of view, I think it closes the legal gap that the NPT has left open. If you look at other weapons of mass destruction, biological weapons and chemical weapons, they are subject to very clear prohibitions. And I think the vast majority of countries make the argument, why should nuclear weapons be dealt with in a different way than chemical weapons and biological weapons? Now, we know ourselves that the countries that have these weapons haven't signed up to the treaty, but that completely misses the point. We always knew that this was not going to happen. We always knew that creating this norm, creating this treaty was a political and a legal step to influence the policies of those countries. So they may never join the treaty, but if through the international community, in a way, voting with their feet by very clearly demonstrating that the nuclear status quo is unsustainable and unacceptable and illegitimate, the hope is that we will influence the discourse in those countries too, that they will then take the steps that actually lead us to more progress on this issue. So the criticism that, oh, this is just a wishful thinking treaty.
Especially in a time where international law is not respected anymore and violated so much.
But I think, I mean, in a way the treaty, the theory of change of the treaty is extremely compelling and even more urgent now. I mean, there's a huge amount of work that still needs to be done. But without that treaty, those who make the argument that we need to find a way to move away from nuclear weapons have no framework. And this is the legal and political framework to pursue this objective. And I would make the argument that pursuing this objective is even more important now than it was a few years ago. And certainly the vast majority of countries, not in Europe, not in parts of Asia, not in parts of the Middle East, but the vast majority of countries share that view, and therefore we're building the legal norm, and we're trying to build the political arguments in order for change. And the last thing I want to say, it's actually the one existential threat that we face that we can solve because it's only, in inverted commas, in very big inverted commas, it's only a political question. Climate change is much harder. Global pandemic is much harder. Runaway artificial intelligence, which is also a potential, that's also very hard. Nuclear weapons, I mean, it's created by humans. It's a handful of countries that have them. We should be able to find ways to at least return to a path that points in to the direction of solving this problem. At the moment, we're going in the wrong direction.
Do you two want, I want to add to this point as well. Yeah.
Yes, actually, to this point, just speaking from my own experience back at the negotiating table, I can only say that if you have political will, if you make a political decision, if you make a commitment, you can solve anything. Even the most difficult issues, nonetheless, you can sit down. You must have patience. Sometimes it takes time and effort. Yes, it's very difficult, but you can nonetheless solve just like anything. Yes, sometimes negotiations do take years, but so it's more about kind of the state of mind. It's about the political decision. Yes, and that's exactly kind of what we don't have today. Yes, and that's why I view the current situation with sadness, because we lost that.
But despite it, you said at the beginning your life work is like going into dust. Do you still have the stamina to like continue this kind of fight, or do you say like, okay, YOLO
well, I'm just old.
good.
I don't have the stamina because of my age, all right? Yeah. But yeah, no, yes, I can still kind of do kind of things, of course, yeah. But
disappointment in the whole community, and I would
yes, there is a
be
lot of
frustrated.
disappointment. It's a lot of concern. What really actually bugs me, what's really kind of don't like, is that I see this big rise and huge like optimism from like non-governmental organizations, for example, yes, and research centers and so on and so forth, that have always advocated reliance on nuclear weapons, more weapons, yes, and better weapons, yes, and they are now like optimistic, yes, and they think that the future is bright, yes, and they really hate that.
I can imagine.
I wanted to add that even if nuclear deterrence works, by work I mean we do not intentionally use nuclear weapons. The first thing is there will always be accidents. Sometimes we are lucky and we are not, sometimes we are not. And what would be even worse is like if a nuclear accident kind of causes retaliation, we cannot exclude that. And the second thing, even we do not have accidents, we pay. Those monetization programs, they cost an enormous lot of money. If I have it in my mind correctly, it's for the states in the next decade, 1.5 billion. This money could be used for...
Trillion.
Billion?
Trillion.
Trillion?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
1.5 billion is...
It's not enough. I'm on the wrong... Yes, I'm on the wrong thing. Yeah.
It's small change.
Small change, coffee.
Yes, it's
So even that makes my argument even stronger here, because I usually do not live in that range of money. We really could use that money for something else. And I think every one of us would have an idea.
Okay, can I ask one final question, then I open it? And it's for all of you, actually, because back in the days, I feel like there was a strong peace movement and anti-war movement and anti-atomic energy movement that would put pressure on governments. It came from civil society, and there was this whole atmosphere of awareness for this issue. And now we live in a world where scientists are radicalized, or it's very hostile towards scientists, as we saw during the pandemic and anything related to climate change. How is it possible for you, or like what would you need from the media or from civil society organizations to help to raise the awareness for this issue? Wait, who was, I feel like who had not enough, okay, yeah, no, go.
Thanks. I think the peace movement was discredited by the nuclear weapons lobby. The peace movement was presented as sort of nice people, but they don't understand security.
Tree huggers, you said, I think.
The tree huggers, yeah. And so it was easy to dismiss them as idealists and following an utopia of peace, whereas we, the realists, we understand security. And I hope I think essentially we will make progress on the nuclear weapons issue if the security calculation around nuclear weapon changes. And I think the only way to do this is if you start weighing what you know about what happens if something goes wrong and how big are the risks are that something goes wrong. If you weigh this against the alleged security benefit and all the uncertainties and assumptions that come with that. So I think that's where we have to get to. And I hope that, I mean, to answer your question, I still think it's actually science. I think it is facts, a facts-based discussion, rather than projecting notions, security guarantee, and so on. We need to look much more critically at the facts. And I think this is I think what we're trying to do by looking more at what is it we know about the effects of these weapons and juxtaposing it, what are actually the assumptions that underpin nuclear weapons policies. And if you then start having a broad discussion about, well, if we weigh that, then maybe that's the way to impact the nuclear weapons discourse in a positive direction, which I think must be a hugely political and broader discussion. So I'm glad for all the people who are here, but we need to have 3,000 next time.
Multiplicators.
So I'm a scientist, and I do like science, and I totally confirm your opinion there. But I think what's important to realize that we have like a huge military-industrial complex with a lot of scientists, and then we do have like the peace movement, many people who actually do that in their free time, and they're not getting paid. And this is like not a good situation to start for society to make decisions on important issues. So if you want to have your arguments, then you should also have scientists that do not directly profit from the things they are advocating for or against. So this is basically my speech, to have like also people working on that issues that are not directly working for the military-industrial complex. And what you also need to realize is that those people, they will not pop out when you need them because there is an actual crisis. Those people actually need to get funded the whole time. And then when there is the crisis, then you have the expertise. It's not working any other way.
Nicola?
You know, when I negotiated, sometimes I was very skeptical about the peace movement, well, you know, the mass peace movement, simply because, well, people out there in the streets basically said, yes, we can do that right away. It's simple and it's easy, yes. And I knew it was not easy, it was not simple, it was very complicated, it was really tiring, right? So don't expect wonders. Yes, you need to spend time like negotiating, solving issues. But at the same time, I also felt this emotional affinity, because basically we were talking about the same thing. We had the same goal. Yes, maybe I simply knew more about these issues, so yes, I understood the complexity. But the end goal is the same, it's actually shared. And yes, we do not have peace movement nowadays. We had huge demonstrations almost over new missiles like in Europe back in the 80s. Today, well, the United States is deploying intermediate range missiles in Germany. Yes, the Russians have actually tested a new intermediate range missile. Yeah, that's okay. No one really pays attention. So I would say that we do need to raise the awareness level. Once again, gosh, I hate saying that, but we do need to relearn to fear nuclear war.
Thank you.
So to be aware of it, yeah. Understanding it's not easy to deal with, but we need to know that.
I hope we contributed a little bit to the mainstream with your expertise. The floor is open to the audience.